On the morning of July 29, 1977, as the sun was just beginning to break the horizon over the Valley of Mexico, something crossed the sky that would forever change the history of UFO sightings in Latin America. He wasn't a peasant in a remote village. He wasn't a solitary witness with a vague history. There were hundreds of people. Among them was a full professional film crew with a 35mm camera in hand, capturing what many consider the first professional filming of a UFO in history. But the story doesn't end there. More than 150 kilometers away, in a remote village in the Sierra de Puebla mountains, something fell from the sky, red hot, nearly decapitating a man. A fragment of metal subjected to such extreme temperatures that it melted the concrete where it struck. Welcome to the story of the Puebla Case. The UFO case that had it all. Credible witnesses, filmed evidence, a physical fragment, a thorough investigation, and a truth no one expected. This is Unexplained Files, and today we're going to unravel one of the most fascinating and complex cases in Mexican ufology, a case that, curiously, many know about with the wrong date. Let me clarify something from the outset. There is no 1994 Puebla UFO case. What does exist, and undeniably so, is the 1977 Puebla case, a case so significant that researchers have dubbed it the perfect case. Why perfect? Because it brought together all the elements any investigator could want: multiple independent witnesses, professional filming, physical evidence, meticulous field research, and scientific analysis of the recovered materials. What makes this case truly extraordinary is not only what happened on July 29, 1977, but the investigative journey that followed. A search that lasted months, involved 13 expeditions to nearly inaccessible terrain, and culminated in a revelation that divided the ufological community. But let's go back to the beginning. To understand this case, we need to place ourselves in Mexico in 1977, a very different country from today. Jose Lopez Portillo had just assumed the presidency a year earlier, bringing promises of democratic opening after decades of authoritarianism. Mexico was experiencing an oil boom that filled the government coffers and generated unprecedented optimism. The Cold War was in full swing. The Soviets and Americans were competing in the space race, launching satellites and probes regularly. In this context, it was not uncommon for fragments of space debris to re-enter the atmosphere. Show! Mexican television archive from that era. But in 1977, there was no internet. There were no social media platforms. Information traveled through newspapers, radio, and the 3 television channels that existed in Mexico. This is crucial to understanding the story because it meant that witnesses in different cities couldn't coordinate their accounts or be influenced by viral information. If multiple people in different places reported the same thing, it was because they had actually seen it. Now, let's meet the protagonist of this story. Abel Salazar, a respected Mexican film director, was filming the final scenes of a movie called Mexican Roguery. For this production, he had assembled a star-studded cast of the time. Show! Photos of Vicente Fernández and Jacqueline Andere. Among them were Vicente Fernández, who decades later would become an icon of Mexican music, and Jacqueline Andere, one of the most recognized actresses of the time. The technical team included Javier Cruz, the cameraman, along with at least 14 other technicians, boom operators, lighting technicians, and assistants. These were professionals accustomed to working with precision, using 35mm film, the cinematic quality standard of the time. The production had chosen Villa Coapa, in the south of Mexico City, to film sunrise scenes. It was a relatively new area at the time, less urbanized than it is today. More than 150 kilometers away, in the Sierra Norte of Puebla, lived Miguel Cruz, a humble man who cultivated coffee in the mountains, in a town called Jopala, a place so remote that in 1977 it barely appeared on detailed maps. Miguel knew nothing about film cameras or UFOs. His life revolved around working in the fields and the daily struggle to survive in the mountains. These two worlds, the glamorous cinematic world of the capital and the rural life in the mountains, were about to collide in the most unexpected way. July 29, 1977, 5:55 a.m. In Villa Coapa, the Estudios America team has been awake for hours. They've set up the lighting equipment, prepared the cameras, and coordinated the scenes. Everything is ready to capture the golden light of dawn. Abel Salazar checks the final details. Javier Cruz adjusts the lens of his 35mm camera. Vicente Fernández reviews his lines. On the other side of the city, hundreds of young people are lined up in front of the National School of Physical Education. They've spent the night there, hoping to get a spot on the entrance exam. They're tired but alert. Some are looking up at the sky, waiting for dawn, and then the sky lights up, but it's not the sun. From the south, 3 luminous objects cross the Valley of Mexico at an astonishing speed. They are not airplanes. They are not helicopters. They are spheres of silvery light, each leaving behind a luminous trail composed of thousands of glowing particles. In the line at the physical education school, dozens of young people look up, astonished. Some shout. Others simply observe in silence, unable to process what they are seeing. At the Mexicana Aviation Building, workers starting their shift look out the windows. Some run to warn their colleagues. And in Villa Coapa, one of the film crew technicians detects something to the south, a kind of explosion in the sky. The objects are approaching rapidly. Abel Salazar doesn't hesitate. He shouts, "Javier, film that now!" Javier Cruz reacts on professional instinct. He turns a camera toward the sky and starts filming. For approximately 30 seconds, the 35mm film captures something that no professional camera had ever documented with such clarity before. 2, possibly 3, luminous spheres moving in formation. But it's not just that objects move fast. It's how they move. Witnesses describe something unusual. The objects appear to be competing with each other. They catch up, overtake, maintain parallel formation, and then move ahead again. A witness named Carlos Tejada, who observes them from another point in the city, describes one of the objects in fascinating detail. One of the UFOs was made up of 2 parts. The first was like a metallic point. The second was a mass of light that was not clearly visible and that left a white trail, like cigarette smoke. The objects continued their trajectory northward, toward Puebla, toward the mountains. In a matter of seconds, they disappear over the horizon. The film crew remains silent, processing what they have just witnessed and what they have just recorded, while in Mexico City, hundreds of witnesses try to understand what they have just seen. In the Sierra Norte of Puebla, something is about to happen. Miguel Cruz leaves his house in Jopala. It's early, but the work in the fields doesn't wait. He walks toward the coffee drying area, the space where he dries the coffee beans in the sun. The sky is clear. There are no clouds to suggest a storm. And then listen to something. It's a sound Miguel describes as thunder, but different, more metallic, more violent. It comes from the sky. Miguel looks up. He sees burning pieces falling from the sky, red-hot fragments, leaving trails of smoke as they descend at breakneck speed. One of those pieces is coming straight towards him. The metal fragment hit the coffee drying rack, less than 2 meters from where Miguel was standing. Had it been 1 step closer, it would have decapitated him. The metal is so hot it melts the concrete floor where it falls. Miguel can feel the radiant heat from where he stands. In shock. For several minutes, Miguel simply stares at the smoking piece. The smell of burnt metal fills the air. Tiny sparks jump from the fragment as it slowly cools. When the metal has finally cooled sufficiently, Miguel cautiously approaches it. He wraps it in sacks so he can handle it. It's an irregular piece, clearly fragmented from something larger. It's roughly the size of a medium-sized sheet of metal. The obvious question crosses his mind. What the heck fell from the sky? Miguel does what anyone would do in his situation and cultural context. He takes a fragment to the church in Jopala. He looks for the town priest. If something inexplicable fell from the sky, the most appropriate place to keep it is God's house, isn't it? But the priest refuses. He doesn't want that thing in his church. He's disturbed by the story, by the object, by the whole affair. He tells Miguel to take it to the civil authorities. This is how the fragment ended up in the hands of the mayor of Jopala, Antonio Hernández Garcia, a local official who, unknowingly, just became the guardian of one of the most controversial pieces of evidence in the history of Mexican ufology. Back in Mexico City, the news begins to spread like wildfire. Guillermo Ochoa, one of Mexico's most respected news commentators, listens to the reports. Hundreds of calls flood into Televisa, the only television network with national coverage. People from different parts of the city, with no connection to each other, are reporting the exact same thing. And there's something else. There's a video recording. That same night, on the news program Hoy Mismo, the most-watched news program in the country, Ochoa presented the case. Javier Cruz's footage was broadcast on national television. All of Mexico stops to watch those images. Two luminous spheres, clearly visible, moving in formation against the dawn sky. They are not diffuse lights. They are not smudges on the lens. They are solid, bright, unmistakable objects. In the following days, the testimonies multiplied. Pilots from Mexicana de Aviation confirmed seeing the objects from the air. An Argentinian pilot, flying over Mexican territory that morning, also reported the sighting. But perhaps the most disturbing report comes from the Sierra de Puebla. Residents of towns more than 100 kilometers around reported hearing a massive explosion that morning. Some described seeing fragments falling from the sky. Others spoke of bright lights crashing into the mountains. On August 15th, less than 3 weeks after the incident, the newspaper La Prensa published that one of the UFOs had exploded in the sky and fallen in the Sierra Norte of Puebla. The story is officially everywhere, but the authorities are maintaining a disturbing silence. When Guillermo Ochoa checks the radar at Mexico City International Airport, he's informed that they detected nothing that morning. Nothing unusual. No unidentified objects. However, multiple journalistic sources report something very different in the Sierra de Puebla. According to these reports, 3 Mexican Air Force planes are circling the area of the suspected crash. A Mexican Army team has set up a perimeter, preventing civilians from accessing certain areas of the mountain range. There are even mentions, never confirmed, of personnel in special suits from an official United States agency investigating the area. But officially, nothing's happening. There are no reports, no statements, no explanations. It is this lack of official information that fuels speculation. If there is nothing to hide, why the absolute silence? When the authorities remain silent, it is the journalists who take the initiative. In August 1977, the magazine Extraterrestrial Contacts, published by Editorial Posada, decided to launch a formal investigation into the case. They weren't going to accept the official version of nothing happened. The team is led by Héctor Chavarría, a meticulous journalist with fascination for unexplained phenomena, but also with a commitment to the truth above personal beliefs. He is accompanied by Pablo Latapí Ortega, another journalist willing to literally venture into the most inaccessible mountains of Mexico to find answers. What these men are about to undertake is one of the most exhaustive field investigations ever conducted on a UFO case in Latin America. Between August and December 1977, Héctor Chavarría and Pablo Latapí made 13 expeditions to the Sierra de Puebla. Let me repeat that: 13 trips to one of the most difficult regions to access in Mexico. Steep mountains, dirt roads that disappear with the rains, towns where outsiders are viewed with suspicion. They divide their search into zones. Zone A includes towns like Tatino, Libres, Texaquispan, and La Caldera. Zone B focuses on the border between Puebla and Veracruz, Filomeno Mata, and Jopala. They explore alternative areas in Ahuacatlan, Camatepec, Zacatlan, and even climb Matlocuay Mountain, popularly known as La Malinche. In every town, they ask questions. They speak with mayors, with farmers, with rural teachers. Did they see anything on July 29th? Did they hear the explosion? Did they find anything unusual? Most of them have no useful information. Some lie, seeking their moment of fame. Others exaggerate previous sightings unrelated to the case. Month after month, the expeditions continue. Resources dwindle. Frustration grows. By the end of 1977, the investigation appeared to have reached a dead end. And then a letter arrives. It's from Filomeno Mata, Veracruz, a small town in the mountains. It's signed by 3 people: Wenceslao Gonzalez Castellan, Jose Cortez, and Mateo Lechuga. 2 of them are rural teachers. The letter is meticulous, detailed, and without sensationalism. It describes the explosion of July 29th, and it mentions something crucial. One of those sparks was recovered after hitting the ground. It was a piece of sheet metal, the material of which we frankly don't know. The authorities of the municipality of Jopala, Puebla, are keeping and preserving it, and they assure us that at the time of its collection, it was still at a very high temperature. A physical fragment exists, and it's in the hands of the mayor of Jopala. Everything changes at that moment. Pablo Latapí makes the first contact with the municipal president of Jopala, Antonio Hernández Garcia. At first, Hernández is reluctant. He's kept that piece of metal for months, unsure what to do with it. He's a civil servant in a remote town, not a scientist. Who is he supposed to give something like that to? But Latapí is persistent and, crucially, professional. He explains that they want to analyze it scientifically, that they can do so without taking the entire piece. They only need a sample. Finally, Hernández agrees. The fragment is subjected to metallurgical analysis in Mexican laboratories. The results are fascinating and disappointing at the same time, depending on what you were expecting to find. The material is basically iron, but not just any iron. It contains traces of molybdenum, copper, and nickel, and it has an extremely low sulfur content, which is unusual. But the most revealing thing is the condition of the metal. It has been subjected to temperatures of at least 1,000 degrees Celsius. This is consistent with the testimony of Miguel Cruz, who saw the piece fall while red hot. The problem, if you're a believer in the extraterrestrial hypothesis, is that there's nothing in the composition of the metal that would be impossible or even improbable for terrestrial technology. Perfectly common materials in the manufacture of space rockets, satellites, and all kinds of aerospace machinery. There are no unknown elements. There are no impossible alloys. There is nothing that screams, this is not of this world. But there is something that is genuine and undeniable. The fragment fell from the sky in Jopala on July 29, 1977, exactly when the object was seen crossing the Valley of Mexico towards Puebla. Miguel Cruz had no way to melt metal at 1,000 degrees Celsius in his humble mountain home. Jopala in 1977 was a town without reliable electricity, without industry, without metallurgical technology. So, if the fragment wasn't manufactured locally and it fell from the sky on that specific day, what was it? The story could have ended there. A fascinating, unsolved mystery, fueling speculation for decades. But in 1990, 13 years after the incident, a final piece of the puzzle arrived. Héctor Escobar, a colleague from the Mexican Society for Skeptical Research, SOMI, decides to do something that no one had done before. Ask NORAD directly. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, tracks everything that enters and leaves Earth's atmosphere. If anything crossed Mexican airspace that morning, they would know. The answer arrives, and it is specific, detailed, and unequivocal. The object that crossed the sky over Mexico on July 29, 1977, which was seen by hundreds of witnesses, filmed on 35mm film, and which left fragments in the Sierra de Puebla, was the third stage of the Soviet rocket that put the Cosmos 929 military satellite into orbit. Cosmos 929 had been launched on July 17, 1977, 12 days before the incident, from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, using a Proton K rocket. The Proton K rockets had multiple stages. Once the satellite reached its orbit, the lower stages of the rocket, now out of fuel, remained in space, until Earth's gravity caused them to re-enter the atmosphere. On July 29, 1977, at 5:55 a.m. Mexico time, that is exactly what happened. When a massive metal object re-enters the atmosphere at tens of thousands of kilometers per hour, it begins to heat up due to friction with the air. The metal glows red hot, then incandescent white. Eventually, the structure fragments. The pieces separate, each following a slightly different trajectory based on its shape, weight, and re-entry angle. From the ground, this looks like multiple luminous objects crossing the sky, sometimes colliding, sometimes separating, exactly as described by witnesses in Mexico City. When the fragments finally hit the ground, they are subjected to extreme temperatures, hot enough to melt concrete, exactly like the fragment that almost killed Miguel Cruz. The composition of the metal iron, molybdenum, copper, nickel, is perfectly consistent with the Soviet space hardware of 1977. Everything fits together, except for one detail. This is where the story becomes fascinating, not because of what happened, but because of how we respond to what happened. We have two narratives, two ways of interpreting exactly the same events. Theory 1. IT was a Cosmos 929. NORAD's explanation is elegant, parsimonious, and backed by traceable data. On July 17, 1977, the Soviet Union launched Cosmos 929 from Baikonur. The satellite is a TKS-1 spacecraft, a test vehicle weighing approximately 20 tons. 12 days later, the third stage of the rocket that launched him re-entered the atmosphere over Mexico, following a south-north trajectory, exactly as described by witnesses. The metal fragments, subjected to extreme temperatures, fall in the Sierra de Puebla. One of them almost kills Miguel Cruz. The composition of the fragment, common aerospace materials. The behavior of the objects, consistent with fragmentation of space debris. The trajectory, confirmed by NORAD. Everything makes sense. But what about the witnesses who describe the objects competing with each other, catching up to each other, overtaking each other, maintaining formation? Does space junk do that? Technically, yes. Fragments with different drag coefficients can create the illusion of coordinated movement. But the witnesses weren't idiots. They were film professionals, commercial pilots, educated people. Would they really confuse chaotic fragmentation with intelligent movement? Theory 2. There was something more. Some researchers argue that the Cosmos 929 explanation, while convenient, does not explain everything. First, the airport radar didn't detect anything. If it was a massive object re-entering the atmosphere, why didn't it appear on radar? Second, the reported military presence in the Sierra de Puebla, 3 Mexican Air Force planes, an army cordon, alleged U.S. agents in protective suits. If it was simply Soviet space junk, why such a display? Why the absolute secrecy? Why isn't there a single official public document about what they recovered? Third, the behavior of the objects. Not one, not two, but hundreds of independent witnesses describe more than just a simple fall. They describe maneuvers, formation, interaction between the objects. And finally, there's the broader context. In the weeks following July 29th, there were multiple additional sightings in the region. Were they all satellites falling? Héctor Chavarria's position. What's fascinating about this case is the evolution of the lead investigator. Héctor Chavarría dedicated months of his life to this case. He undertook 13 grueling expeditions. He interviewed dozens of witnesses. He analyzed a fragment. He wrote a complete book about the investigation. And when he received the information from NORAD, he did something that very few paranormal investigators have the courage to do. He accepted that he was probably wrong. Chavarría concluded that, based on the available evidence, the object was most likely Cosmos 929. Not because he wanted to discredit the witnesses. Not because he was a dogmatic skeptic. But because the evidence pointed in that direction. This earned him fierce criticism from the UFO community. Some accused him of selling out. Others said he had been pressured by the government. But Chavarría maintained his position. A good investigator follows the evidence, not his beliefs. However, even accepting the explanation of Cosmos 929, questions remain unanswered. 1. The official silence. Why did the Mexican government never publish an official report on the incident? If it was simply a Soviet satellite, that's not a state secret. In fact, it would be an excellent opportunity to educate the public about atmospheric reentries and demonstrate transparency. But there's nothing, not a press release, not an Air Force report, no explanation from the Army about what they did in the mountains. Absolute silence. Because, 2, the military presence. Multiple news sources reported military activity in the Sierra de Puebla after the incident. This is not a vague rumor. It appears in publications from that time. If they recovered fragments, where are they now? What analyses were done? What conclusions were reached? All this information, if it exists, remains classified or simply lost in bureaucratic files. 3. Subsequent sightings. In the weeks and months following July 29th, there were reports of additional sightings in Puebla and neighboring states. Were they all misinterpretations? Mass hysteria fueled by the original case? Or, as some suggest, was there something else happening in the skies over Mexico in 1977? For the filming, the 35mm film exists. It has been analyzed by experts. It shows no obvious signs of tampering or fraud. But here's the awkward question. If you know it's space junk, does the filming become irrelevant? It remains with a few professionally filmed atmospheric reentry recordings captured by chance. That in itself has scientific and documentary value. But emotionally, psychologically, it's not the same anymore, is it? The Puebla case had a profound impact on Mexican ufology and on how Mexico perceives the UFO phenomenon. Miguel Cruz returned to his life in Jopala. His story was documented, his testimony recorded. He donated part of his story to science. And then he simply went back to growing coffee. He didn't write a book. He didn't give press conferences. He didn't try to monetize his experience. The film crew of Picardia Mexicana, Abel Salazar, Vicente Fernández, Jacqueline Andere, Javier Cruz, maintained their consistent testimonies throughout the years. None of them changed their story. None of them recanted. They saw something extraordinary that July morning. The explanation of what may have changed, but the experience was real. The case generated unprecedented media coverage for a UFO sighting in Mexico. Major newspapers, national television, specialized magazines, all covered the story. This established a pattern. The Mexican media began to take UFO reports more seriously, or at least give them more coverage. The case inspired a fascination with UFOs in Puebla that continues to this day. In 2001, the municipality of Atlixco erected a UFO-shaped monument related to sightings in the area during the 1990s. Tourist routes for UFO observation were established. UFO conventions were organized. Puebla became synonymous with unexplained aerial phenomena, all thanks to that July 29, 1977. But perhaps the most important legacy of the Puebla case is methodological. Héctor Chavarría demonstrated how a serious investigation should be conducted. Extensive fieldwork, 13 expeditions, meticulous documentation of testimonies, scientific analysis of physical evidence, willingness to follow the evidence, even if it contradicts your hopes, intellectual humility to accept when you were wrong. This research model, rigorous, skeptical, but open-minded, is what separates serious ufology from conspiratorial pseudoscience. The case is no longer under active investigation in the traditional sense. The Cosmos 929 explanation is accepted by the scientific community and by many serious ufologists, but interest has not died. The History Channel produced a documentary about the case in its series Extraterrestrial Contact. Researchers like Ana Luisa Cid continue to analyze the case from contemporary perspectives. Podcasts such as Secret Files and Unusual Experience have dedicated episodes to the case in recent years. And every July 29th, on significant anniversaries, Mexican media remember the day something crossed the sky and changed everything. So, what does the Puebla case really tell us? I think it tells us something deeper than simply it was a satellite or it was an extraterrestrial UFO. It tells us something about the human experience in the face of the unknown. Hundreds of people witnessed something extraordinary that morning. Their astonishment was genuine. Their bewilderment was real. Miguel Cruz nearly died when a fragment of burning metal fell from the sky. Those experiences are not invalidated just because we now have a prosaic explanation. When you don't know that what you're seeing is the third stage of a Soviet rocket disintegrating, what you experience is genuinely inexplicable, and that feeling of awe, of confronting the unknown, that is profoundly human. The Puebla case also teaches us that the way we seek answers matters as much as the answers themselves. Héctor Chavarría could have clung to the extraterrestrial hypothesis. He had invested months, resources, and credibility in the investigation. It would have been easier, more exciting, and more profitable to keep the mystery alive. But he chose the truth over the convenient narrative. That is integrity. And yet, even with the explanation in Cosmos 929, there are aspects of the case that remain shrouded in mystery. official secrecy, the absence of public documents, reports of military activity that were never officially confirmed or denied. Pause. These gaps in information don't prove a conspiracy, but they do demonstrate that, even in cases with rational explanations, a lack of transparency fuels speculation. Perhaps the most interesting question is not what crossed the sky over Mexico on July 29th, 1977. Perhaps the question is, why do we need it to be something more than a satellite? We live in a universe of 400 billion stars in our galaxy alone, in a cosmos of 2 trillion galaxies. The odds of us being alone are, statistically, ridiculously low, but so far, we have no conclusive evidence that they have visited us. And that is, in a way, more unsettling than any extraterrestrial explanation, because it means that, despite that entire universe out there, we are still essentially alone in our mountains and cities, looking at the sky, wondering. The Puebla Case of 1977, not 1994, but 1977, remains one of the most important UFO cases in Latin America, not because it proves extraterrestrial visits, but because it demonstrates how humans respond to the inexplicable. It demonstrates that multiple, credible, independent witnesses can see exactly the same thing and report it truthfully. It demonstrates that physical evidence can exist, be analyzed, and still be interpreted in radically different ways. It demonstrates that serious research requires a willingness to accept boring answers instead of exciting mysteries. And it shows that, even when we find answers, there are always questions left. Did the Mexican roguery Team see Soviet space junk that July morning? Probably so. Does that mean the case doesn't matter? Absolutely not. Because what matters isn't just what crossed the sky. What matters is that we looked up, that we asked questions, that we investigated, that we sought answers. That curiosity, that need to understand the unknown, is what makes us human. And who knows, perhaps one day, somewhere, something will cross the sky that defies rational explanation. Something that truly challenges everything we know about the universe. When that day comes, if it ever does, let's hope we have investigators with the integrity of Héctor Chavarría. People willing to follow the evidence, no matter where it leads. Until then, we continue to look upwards. That's all for this episode of Unexplained Files. If this story captivated you as much as it did me, help me share it with others by liking this video. And if you'd like to see more cases like this, thoroughly researched, rigorous, and heartfelt, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Let me know in the comments. Do you think it was Cosmos 929, or do you think there's more to this story? What case would you like me to investigate next? And remember, the truth is out there, but we will only find it if we are willing to search for it honestly. See you in the next episode. Keep looking up.